She said she had nowhere to go, and those words changed the life of a man who had already given up on living. Can you imagine being so lost, so desperate, that your only option is to trust a complete stranger who found you unconscious in the rain? But this story actually happened in the rural American South back in July of 1896, on an isolated farm where two broken hearts collided at the exact moment they had both lost all hope. Before we continue with this story, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit that like button down below, because what happened between this young woman and that solitary farmer is going to move you in ways you can't imagine. Their meeting changed not only their destinies but the fate of an entire community that witnessed the impossible. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching this story from. I love knowing how far these narratives travel. The rain was coming down with violence that afternoon in July, turning the red clay road into a slick, treacherous paste. The sky was the color of molten lead, heavy and low, and the wind whipped the tall pines and ancient oaks lining the path with enough force to snap branches clean off. It was the kind of storm that sent animals scurrying for cover, the kind of afternoon where no sensible soul would be out of doors. But Alice Martin was. She had been walking, or rather stumbling along the road for hours, perhaps days. She had lost count. The navy blue dress she wore when she fled 3 days ago was unrecognizable now, torn at the hem, caked in mud up to her knees, soaked and heavy as if laden with stones. The leather boots her mother had bought especially for the wedding, that accursed wedding she had run from, were destroyed. One had lost its heel miles back. The other had split at the side, leaving her toes exposed and bleeding. Alice was 21, with dark brown hair that now clung to her pale face like wet ropes, and green eyes that were once vibrant but at that moment looked like dull glass. Her cracked lips trembled, not just from the cold but from fever. Her entire body burned from the inside, while the freezing rain hammered her from the outside, creating a painful contrast that sent her drifting into delirium. She no longer knew where she was, recognized nothing around her, simply putting one foot in front of the other because stopping meant giving up, and giving up meant they would win. They, the family that sold her like livestock, the colonel who bought her like property. The whole world that said a woman has no voice, no choice, no right over her own body or her own destiny. Alice tripped over a rock she didn't see, or perhaps her legs simply gave out. She couldn't tell. She fell to her knees in the mud, hands sinking into the sodden earth as she tried to brace herself. She pushed herself up with an effort that felt superhuman. 3 more steps. Then 2. The world was spinning, the trees dancing in circles around her, the sky and earth blending into a grey and red blur. She thought of her mother, Dolores Martin, owner of a boarding house in Willow Creek, a woman with calloused hands and a heart hardened by early widowhood, the mother who cried when Alice begged not to marry that man, but who wiped her tears and said there was no choice. The debts were too great. Colonel Ignatius Sampson had offered to pay everything to clear the family name in exchange for a young, beautiful wife to decorate his table and warm his bed. Alice could still hear his voice, deep, slurred, smelling of whiskey when he visited her for the first time. "You'll get used to it, girl," the colonel had said, as he ran his thick fingers over her face with a possessiveness that made her stomach turn. They all get used to it. She had seen the scar on his forehead, the way his servants flinched when he passed, had heard the rumors about his first wife, who died in circumstances no one spoke of aloud, but everyone whispered about. The night before the wedding, when the house slept, Alice had taken the little money she managed to save over the years, put on a dress and a shawl, took one last look at the room where she grew up, and climbed out the window. She slid down the shed roof, jumped the back fence and started walking. She had no plan, no destination, only the absolute certainty that she preferred to die free than live as the property of a cruel man. The money had run out on the second day. She had bought bread and milk from a peddler on the roadside who looked at her with suspicion but asked no questions. After that, nothing. Hunger had joined the exhaustion, the cold, and the fever that started on the second night when she slept under a bridge, waking up soaked by the freezing dawn dew. Now, 3 days after fleeing, Alice felt she had reached the end. Her body no longer obeyed. Her legs shook uncontrollably, her vision darkening at the edges as if someone were closing heavy curtains. She took one more step, and something different happened. She didn't trip, didn't slip. Her strength simply abandoned her body all at once, like water draining from a basin. Alice fell face first into the mud of the road, the impact barely registering in a consciousness already slipping into a dark, silent place. The last thing she felt was the cold rain beating against her back, and the last thing she thought was that at least she had died free. At least there was that. The darkness took everything. August Mercer was checking the north fence of his property when the rain started falling with a violence he hadn't anticipated. He grumbled under his breath, pulled his leather hat lower over his brow, and decided the fence could wait until the weather turned. There was no sense in getting soaked for nothing. Nothing made much sense in the last 3 years anyway, he thought with a bitterness that had become his constant companion. He was 38, but seemed to carry decades more on his hunched shoulders, in his heavy gait, in the deep brown eyes that rarely met the gaze of others. August was tall, with the broad shoulders of a man who had worked the land his whole life, a thick beard he didn't trim regularly, and black hair already speckled with white at the temples. He wore simple work clothes, thick canvas trousers, a cream cotton shirt with rolled-up sleeves, worn boots. Clearwater Farm was located 5 miles from the town of Willow Creek, a 300-acre property that had once been prosperous and now merely existed. August still planted what was necessary to survive, still raised some chickens, 2 dairy cows, and half a dozen pigs. But the big house with its sturdy timber walls and slate roof, which had once been full of life, was now a silent mausoleum where he wandered like a ghost. 3 years, 2 months and 17 days since typhoid fever had taken everything that mattered. Eleanor, a wife with a luminous smile and hands that transformed any corner into a home. Gabriel, his 4-year-old son, who ran through the house laughing with that crystalline laughter of a child who hasn't yet known the world's malice. Both had fallen ill at the same time, on the same day, in April of 1893. High fever, delirium, convulsions. August had ridden to town seeking a doctor who arrived too late. Within 3 days, they were both dead and buried in the small family plot on the property, beneath the yellow dogwood Eleanor loved so much. August never forgave himself. He should have isolated the family when the first cases appeared in town. He should have been more careful with the well water. He should have called the doctor sooner. He should have done 1,000 different things that might, just might, have saved the 2 people who gave meaning to his existence. After the funeral, he had locked the master bedroom, turned the photographs face down because he couldn't bear the smiling faces accusing him of failure, and had begun to merely exist. He woke up, worked mechanically, ate little, drank enough whiskey to sleep, and repeated it all the next day. Thomas, the old caretaker who had served August's father, still lived in a small shack out back and helped with the basics, but they barely spoke. August didn't want to talk, didn't want to feel, didn't want anything other than to be left in peace to wither away. He was riding back toward the house, his leather duster only partially protecting him from the rain falling almost horizontally with the force of the wind, when his horse suddenly balked. August pulled the reins impatiently, ordering the animal forward, but the horse wouldn't obey. It snorted, shook its head, and sidestepped as if wanting to avoid something on the path. It was then that August saw it, a shape on the road, motionless, For an absurd second his heart stopped, memories of Gabriel playing in the rain flooding his mind. But it wasn't a child. It was an adult body, lying face down in the mud, arms spread, completely still. August dismounted in an automatic motion, his body reacting before his mind could fully process. He approached slowly, the mud sucking at his boots with every step. He knelt beside the body and turned it over carefully. It was a young woman, very young. Her face was covered in mud, and her hair was plastered wet, but even so, he saw she was beautiful in a delicate, almost fragile way. Her skin was pale as wax, her lips nearly blue. August placed his fingers on her neck, searching for a pulse, and felt a strange relief when he found a weak but present beat. Alive. She was alive. And in that moment, kneeling in the rain, holding the unconscious body of a complete stranger, August Mercer faced a dilemma he hadn't expected. The part of him that had died with Eleanor and Gabriel screamed to leave her there, to get back on his horse and move on, not to get involved. Not to risk feeling anything again, because feeling meant losing, and he wouldn't survive another loss. But there was a smaller, weaker part, buried so deep he had forgotten it existed, the part that had been a good man, a loving husband, a devoted father. That part whispered that leaving someone to die when he could save them was crossing a line from which there would be no return. August squeezed his eyes shut, took a deep breath, feeling the freezing rain run down his face, and made a decision that would change everything. He lifted the young woman into his arms with an ease that surprised even him. She was light, almost insubstantial, wet and cold like a river stone in winter. He draped her across the saddle, mounted behind her, holding her steady so she wouldn't fall, and galloped toward the farmhouse, feeling the weight of her body against his, thinking he had either made a terrible mistake or just done the first right thing in 3 years. He didn't know which. The main house of Clearwater Farm was a solid construction of hewn timber, thick walls that kept it cool in summer and warm in winter, a high-pitched roof, a wide porch with wooden columns. It had been beautiful once, when Eleanor still lived to fill the vases with wildflowers, polish the furniture, keep everything clean and welcoming. Now it was just a functional structure, clean enough not to be filthy, but lifeless, soulless. August entered through the front door carrying the young woman, shouting for Thomas, who came running from the kitchen, eyes wide at seeing the boss soaked and holding an unconscious woman. "Go get Miss Hattie," August ordered, with a voice he hadn't used in so long it came out raspy. "Tell her it's urgent. Tell her there's a very sick girl here." Thomas, a man in his late 60s, thin as a fishing pole and agile as a cat, didn't waste time with questions. He ran toward the stables to grab a horse. August carried the young woman to the guest room on the ground floor, a room he hadn't used in years, but which still had a bed made up with sheets that Thomas changed now and then out of stubbornness to keep the house functioning. He laid her on the mattress, and it was then that he really looked at her for the first time with attention. Even covered in mud, even with blue lips and sickly skin, she was beautiful. Delicate cheekbones, long dark lashes, a small straight nose, a well-defined mouth. The hands he held to check her temperature were small, long fingers, nails broken and full of dirt as if she had been digging recently. The dress she wore had been fine once. Quality fabric, well stitched, but it was destroyed now. She was burning up with fever. August touched her forehead and felt heat radiating in waves. He ran to the kitchen, pumped cold water from the indoor cistern, filled a basin, grabbed clean cloths and returned. He began to wipe her face carefully, removing layers of dry and fresh mud, revealing the fair skin beneath. As he cleaned, August realized something strange was happening. It had been 3 years since he touched another person beyond functional handshakes with Thomas or suppliers in town. It had been 3 years since he avoided any real human contact, because contact meant connection, and connection meant vulnerability. But now, running a damp cloth over this stranger's face, over her thin arms, over her wounded hands. He felt something awakening inside his chest. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was something more primitive. It was the recognition of another human being suffering. It was an ancestral impulse to care, to protect. And it terrified him deeply because feeling anything after so long numb was like blood returning to a sleeping limb. It hurt. The young woman moaned softly, turning her head from side to side, lips moving as if speaking to someone in a dream or delirium. August leaned in closer to listen, but the words were unintelligible, just fragmented sounds of suffering. Miss Hattie arrived 40 minutes later, entering the room with an energy that belied her 70 years. She was a small, rounded woman, hair completely white and pulled back in a tight bun, black eyes that saw more than they should. A midwife, herbalist and healer, known throughout the region for hands that cured and a tongue that spared no one. Hattie had attended August's birth, had been a constant presence in his childhood, a close friend of his mother. When Eleanor and Gabriel died, she had tried to help, offered prayers, teas, conversation. August had refused everything, shut down completely. She had respected his grief, but had suffered seeing the boy she helped raise turn into an empty shell. So imagine her surprise at being called urgently to find August Mercer, the man who avoided even the shadow of human contact, tending to an unknown young woman with an attention she hadn't seen in him since before the tragedy. "What happened here, August?" Hattie asked as she approached the bed, placing an experienced hand on the girl's forehead and frowning immediately at the heat. "Found her passed out on the road," August replied. "Don't know who she is, don't know where she came from. Just know she was going to die if I didn't bring her in." Hattie examined the young woman with the efficiency of decades of practice. Checked her pulse, pulled back her eyelids to check her eyes, examined the wounded hands, the battered feet, pressed on her abdomen, checking for internal pain. Finally, she sighed and looked at August with an expression that mixed medical concern and something else, something that looked almost like hope. "High fever, severe dehydration, extreme exhaustion," Hattie listed. "This girl walked for days without eating or drinking properly. Her feet are destroyed, cuts infected, body at its limit. She's going to need constant care for the next few days. She might not make it." August felt something tighten in his chest, an uncomfortable and unwanted sensation. "What needs to be done?" he asked, his voice coming out firmer than he felt. Hattie began barking orders, and August obeyed without question. He boiled water for a medicinal tea of willow bark and mint. He helped remove the girl's soaked clothes, turning his face away when Hattie stripped her completely to dress her in a clean nightgown that had belonged to Eleanor, and that August didn't know still existed. He brought wool blankets to combat the chills shaking the thin body. He held her head while Hattie forced spoonfuls of liquid between unconscious lips. He worked alongside the old healer until dawn, when the fever finally began to drop a few degrees and the young woman's breathing became less labored. Hattie declared she had done all she could for now, that the rest depended on the girl's will to live. "Who do you think she is?" August asked as Hattie prepared to leave, a question that surprised him because he hadn't planned to ask it. Hattie looked at him with those piercing black eyes that always seemed to see the deeper layers of people. "I don't know who she is," she answered slowly. "But I know what she is. A runaway. Look at the clothes, Gus. Too fine for a farm girl, but not rich enough for high society. Merchant family, maybe. And look at the hands, not the hands of someone who works the fields, but they're truly wounded. She ran from something bad enough to prefer dying on the road than going back." August processed this in silence. Part of him, the cowardly part, wanted to tell Thomas to take the girl back to town as soon as she improved, hand her over to the authorities, wash his hands of any responsibility. But another part, the one that had awakened today for the first time in years, whispered that perhaps he had found this girl exactly because both needed to be found. "You're going to stay with her," Hattie said. And it wasn't a question. "For the first time in 3 years, you're going to care for someone other than yourself, and it's going to do you good, whether you want it to or not." Hattie left in the early morning, leaving detailed instructions, and August alone with the unconscious stranger. He dragged a chair to the bedside, sat down, and spent the rest of the night watching her face. He observed how her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks, how her lips still trembled occasionally, how she sometimes furrowed her brow as if fighting demons in her dreams. And August Mercer, a man who had sworn never to care about anything or anyone again, felt something dangerous settling in his chest, curiosity about who this girl was, worry about whether she would survive, something else he didn't dare name yet. The grey morning light began to filter through the cracks in the shutters when she finally moved, for real. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking against the weak clarity, and August saw they were green, pale green like creek water in spring, extraordinarily beautiful even clouded by fever and confusion. The green eyes scanned the unfamiliar room, passed over the simple but solid furniture, the whitewashed walls, the cream cotton curtains. Finally, they landed on him. She looked at him for a long moment, and August saw confusion being replaced by fear. "Where am I?" she whispered in a voice hoarse from days without proper water. "In my house," August replied, keeping his voice low and calm as he would with a frightened animal. "Clearwater Farm. I found you passed out on the road yesterday afternoon. You were very sick. Still are." She tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't obey, falling back onto the pillows with a groan of pain. Her hands gripped the sheets as if needing to anchor herself to something solid, and August saw panic crossing her face. "You don't need to be afraid," he said, and surprised himself with how much he wanted her to believe that. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want you to get better, and then you can go wherever you want." Her green eyes examined him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if she were trying to assess if she could trust him or not. August sustained the gaze, letting her see whatever she wanted to see. Finally, something in her face relaxed minimally, immediate terror replaced by vigilant caution. "What is your name?" August asked. "Alice," she replied after a hesitation. "Alice Martin." "August," he said. "August Mercer, this is my land. You are safe here." Safe. The words seemed to reverberate in the air between them, loaded with meanings neither was ready to explore yet. Alice closed her eyes again, exhaustion pulling her back toward unconsciousness, but before sleeping, she whispered something August almost didn't hear. "Thank you." And in that simple word, loaded with gratitude and relief and vulnerability, something inside August that had been frozen for 3 whole years began, very slowly, to thaw. He didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed forever. Alice woke up for the 4th time in the last few hours, and this time the room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. She blinked slowly, trying to organize thoughts that still swam in a thick fog of fever and confusion. How long had passed since she first opened her eyes and saw that man with the sad eyes sitting by the bed? Hours, days. She turned her head on the pillow, and he was still there. August. He had said his name was August. He was sitting in the same wooden chair, but now his posture was different, body leaning forward, elbows resting on knees, hands clasped, looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully decipher. Concern, maybe. Fatigue, certainly. Something else that made her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with illness. "You're awake for real this time," he said, and it wasn't a question. His voice was deep, rough, with a country drawl that elongated the vowels. "Can you drink water?" Alice tried to answer, but her throat was so dry only a rasping sound came out. She nodded and immediately regretted it when the room spun. August stood up in a fluid motion for someone who had likely spent hours sitting in the same position, grabbed a clay mug from the side table, and approached the bed. He slid an arm behind her shoulders with surprising care for such large, calloused hands, helping her sit up partially, and brought the mug to her lips. Alice drank with the greed of someone who had spent days dehydrated, cool water sliding down her throat like divine blessing. "Slow down," August said when she tried to down it all at once. "You'll get sick if you drink too fast." She obeyed, forcing herself to take small sips, even when all she wanted was to pour the liquid down her gullet. When she finished half the mug, he laid her back on the pillows, and she realized she was wearing a nightgown that wasn't hers, clean and smelling of lye soap and lavender. She also realized someone had washed her hair, which was loose over her shoulders and no longer matted with mud and sweat. "How long?" Alice whispered. "How long have I been?" "3 days," August replied, returning to the chair, but not sitting, standing with arms crossed over his broad chest. "You got here Thursday afternoon. Today is Sunday. The fever ran high the first 2 days. Miss Hattie, the healer woman, said it was a close call. 3 days. Alice processed the information with difficulty. 3 days here meant 6 days since she fled. 6 days meant they had certainly discovered her whereabouts, or were close to it. Panic began to rise up her throat like bitter bile. "I need to go," she said, trying to sit up again, but her body didn't cooperate. Her hands shook, her arms wouldn't support her weight, and she collapsed back with a frustrated groan. "I need to leave here. I can't stay. They'll find me." "Who will find you?" August asked, voice becoming lower, more cautious. Alice looked at him and saw in his brown eyes something that made her hesitate. It wasn't morbid curiosity, it wasn't judgment, it was just genuine interest, real concern, as if he really wanted to know, really wanted to help. When was the last time someone looked at her like that, as if her words mattered, as if she were a person and not property? The tears came before she could stop them. They started slow, then came faster, then turned into sobs that shook her whole body and made her ribs ache. 6 days of terror, hunger, exhaustion and fear condensed into weeping she hadn't given herself permission to release while fleeing, because stopping to cry meant stopping to feel, and stopping to feel meant giving up. August stood still for a moment that seemed like an eternity, clearly uncomfortable, then walked to the bed and sat on the edge carefully so as not to startle her. He didn't touch her, kept his hands on his own knees, but his presence was solid, real, almost comforting in a strange way. "You don't have to tell me," he said slowly. "Don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to. But if someone is looking for you, if someone hurt you, I need to know so I can protect you, or at least to know what I'm protecting you from." Alice wiped her face with the back of her hand, taking several deep breaths, trying to recover some control. She looked at that strange man who had every reason to simply return her to town and wash his hands of any trouble, but who instead spent 3 days caring for her while fever consumed her. "They want to marry me to a monster," she said finally, voice coming out firmer than she expected. "My mother sold me to pay off debts, Colonel Ignatius Sampson. Do you know the name?" August went very still, but she saw muscles in his jaw bunching. "I know him," he said, and the tone was dangerous. "Everyone in the region knows him. He owns 3 big plantations, has political pull, friends in high places, and he has a reputation for being a violent man. His first wife died," Alice completed when he hesitated. "I know. They say it was pneumonia, but nobody believes that. The maids whisper about bruises, broken bones, screams in the middle of the night. I met him 3 times before the wedding. The 3rd time he touched me, ran his hand down my face, said I was going to learn to obey. His eyes were empty, like a snake's." "And you ran," August said, something resembling respect tinting his voice. "I ran on the eve of the wedding," Alice confirmed. Went out the window in the middle of the night with the clothes on my back and what little money I'd saved. Didn't have a plan, didn't have a place to go. I have some distant kin in Springfield. Thought maybe I could make it there, but the money ran out on the second day. After that, I just walked. Just kept walking because stopping meant they had won. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. August looked at her with an intensity that made something strange happen in her chest, a heat that had nothing to do with fever. She noticed for the first time how handsome he was in a rustic, masculine way. Strong jaw covered by stubble, a nose that had been broken sometime in the past, deep eyes but of a beautiful color, golden green in the afternoon light. A big, solid body, the kind of body that had worked the earth for decades. "You can stay here," August said suddenly, and seemed as surprised as she was by the declaration. "I mean, until you recover completely, until we figure out what to do. The Colonel has no reason to look here. I avoid town, don't get involved in gossip, nobody knows my business." "Why?" Alice asked, needing to understand. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. I could be anything. It could be a lie." "It's not a lie," August said with absolute certainty. "I saw your feet, Alice, saw your hands, saw the state you were in. A person doesn't put themselves in that situation by choice. And as for why—" He hesitated, gaze drifting to the window, to the golden light outside. "It's been a long time since I've done anything that mattered. It's been a long time since I've just existed. Maybe it's time to do something different." There was a story there, Alice realized. There was pain in the spaces between those words. There was loss in the way he avoided looking at her when he spoke about just existing. She wanted to ask, wanted to know, but her body was starting to scream for more rest. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll pay you back, how I'll thank you, but—" "No need," August interrupted, standing up from the bed. "Rest now. Miss Hattie left chicken broth and more medicinal tea. I'll bring it when you wake up again." He walked to the door but stopped with his hand on the knob, turning partially. "Alice?" "Yes?" "You were brave. Not everyone has the courage to choose the uncertainty of freedom over the security of a prison. That means something." And he left before she could answer, closing the door softly behind him and leaving Alice alone with turbulent thoughts and the strange sensation that she had just met someone very important. The days that followed established a routine that was new for both of them. Alice regained her strength slowly, first managing to sit in bed without help, then standing for short periods, then walking to the window to look at the property stretching in all directions. Clearwater Farm was beautiful in a rustic, honest way. Fields of red earth, pasture where cows grazed peacefully, native woods in the distance, all bathed in the golden light of the American winter. August brought food 3 times a day. Chicken broth first, then warm grits with milk, eventually rice with beans and stewed vegetables. He would sit in the chair while she ate, not talking much but not leaving either. A silent presence that Alice began to find comforting rather than intimidating. Miss Hattie came every afternoon, checked Alice's temperature, changed the dressings on her battered feet, prepared bitter teas that healed but made an inevitable grimace appear. The old woman was too observant, Alice soon realized. She saw things that shouldn't be visible, like the way Alice unconsciously smoothed her hair when August entered the room, or how his gaze lingered a second longer than necessary when he thought no one was paying attention. On the 5th day since she first woke up, Alice was strong enough to leave the room. She put on a simple calico dress Hattie had brought, too loose but comfortable, and walked slowly down the hallway, exploring the house that had been her refuge. The house was big, but strangely empty of life. Good furniture, but covered by a fine layer of dust that spoke of functional cleaning but no care. Walls too clean, without pictures, without decoration. Photographs on the sideboard all turned face down deliberately, heavy curtains keeping much of the natural light out. It was a house that had once been a home, but was now just a structure, waiting for something or someone to bring its soul back. Alice passed through the living room, the dining area, reached the large kitchen with its cast-iron wood stove and a massive timber table capable of seating 10 people but set for only one. Thomas, the old caretaker she had seen briefly over the last few days, was stirring something in a pot and turned, surprised to see her. "Miss, you should be resting," he said, but his voice was gentle, not scolding. "I've rested too much," Alice replied with a small smile. "Need to move or I'll forget how to walk. Can I help with something?" Thomas looked at her with an appraisal that lasted a long moment, then nodded toward a chair. "Can peel those potatoes if you want, but sit, don't stay on your feet too long." Alice sat down and picked up the knife and the first potato, fingers remembering automatic movements from years helping her mother at the boarding house. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Thomas spoke again. "It's good to have someone in the kitchen again," he said without looking at her, concentrated on chopping carrots. House got too quiet after Miss Eleanor passed. "Eleanor," Alice repeated softly. "Was she his wife?" "She was," Thomas confirmed, and the past contained worlds of pain. Her and the boy, Gabriel, was 4 years old. Typhoid fever took them both in April of '93. The boss never recovered. Think part of him died with them. Alice felt something tighten in her chest, a sudden deep compassion for that taciturn man who saved her life. She understood now the reason for the overturned photographs, the lifeless house, the eyes that carried a weight impossible to describe. "Is that why he helped me?" she asked quietly. "Because he knows what it is to lose everything?" Thomas stopped chopping and looked at her directly for the first time. "Maybe," he said slowly, "or maybe because you're the first person in 3 years that made him feel something other than pain. Seen the way he looks at you, miss. Seen how he spent 3 nights without sleep caring for you when the fever was high. Don't know what's happening between you two, but I know I haven't seen the boss this present in years." Alice's cheeks heated with a blush that had nothing to do with fever. She didn't know what to say, so she went back to peeling potatoes with more attention than the task required, but her mind spun with confused and dangerous thoughts. That was how August found them half an hour later. He entered through the back door carrying firewood, stopped abruptly upon seeing Alice sitting at the kitchen table peeling vegetables as if she belonged there, hair loose falling over her shoulders, face already with more colour, and something passed through his eyes that made Alice's heart give a strange jump. "You should be resting," he said, but there was no real reprimand in his voice, only concern. "I've rested 3 whole days," Alice replied, meeting his eyes and holding the gaze. "Need to move. Besides, I want to help. You saved me, gave me a roof and food. The least I can do is be useful." August deposited the wood beside the stove, took off his hat, running a hand through his messy dark hair. "You don't owe me anything, Alice. Don't need to work to pay for lodging." "It's not about owing," she said with a firmness that surprised both of them. "It's about wanting to. I don't want to lie in a room feeling useless and helpless, felt helpless long enough. I want to do something, feel like I have a purpose." Something changed in his face, expression softening in a way she hadn't seen before. "I understand," August said quietly. "Then you can help as much as you want, but don't push yourself too hard. You're still recovering." And there was a moment there, in the warm kitchen smelling of cooking food and soft afternoon light entering through the window, when their eyes met and something passed between them. It wasn't just gratitude on her part or compassion on his. It was mutual recognition of 2 equally wounded, equally lonely people, finding in someone else something they didn't know they were looking for. Thomas cleared his throat loudly, breaking the moment, and both looked away too quickly to be casual. Days turned into a week, and a week into 2. Alice gained strength quickly, youth and a healthy constitution recovering from the ordeal. She began assuming tasks in the house without asking permission, simply doing what she saw needed doing. Cleaned windows, letting light in again, scoured pans that were stained, planted sprigs of mint and basil in pots on the kitchen windowsill. Sewed tears in August's work shirts that had only been roughly patched. Small things, but they transformed the house. And more than that, they transformed the dynamic between her and August. He was still quiet, still carried sadness on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. But Alice began to see cracks in the armor. She surprised him smiling, small and fleeting but real, when she made a silly joke during dinner. He began to tell stories about the farm, about how his father had bought the property decades ago, what it was like building everything from scratch. Asked about her life before, and Alice found herself telling him about her mother's boarding house, the eccentric guests, dreams of one day seeing the big city of St. Louis or Chicago, and there were moments of tension that weren't uncomfortable, just charged, when their hands touched by chance reaching for the same object. When Alice stumbled coming down the stairs and August grabbed her waist to steady her, fingers lingering a second longer than necessary, when she caught him looking at her with an expression that made heat rise up her neck and face. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. It was Miss Hattie who brought the first bad news. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon, face more serious than usual, and asked to speak with August and Alice together. "There are rumors in town," the healer said bluntly when the three were sitting in the living room, "about a girl who ran from a wedding to Colonel Sampson. He is furious, offering a reward for information. And there's another one too, a certain Vance Packard, your neighbor August, who's going around asking questions about strange movement on your farm." Alice's stomach plummeted. "Vance," August said with a voice that went dangerous. "Why would he care?" Hattie sighed. "Because he never got over the fact that you wouldn't sell the land to him after Eleanor died. Because he's a small man who likes to cause trouble. Because he saw you buying extra provisions in town last week and is spreading poison about you having a woman living here." "I need to go," Alice said immediately, standing up. "I can't put August in danger because of me." "If the Colonel finds out I'm here—" "You're not going anywhere," August interrupted, standing up too. "Not while you're still in danger." "But I am the danger," Alice protested, voice rising. "I brought this to your door. If he comes here, if he causes trouble, I'll never forgive myself." August walked to her and did something he hadn't done before. Put his hands on her shoulders, firm and warm even through the fabric of her dress, forcing her to look at him. "Alice, listen. Listen well. You aren't causing trouble. You asked for help and I chose to help. That is my choice, understand? Mine." His eyes were so intense she couldn't look away, heart beating so loud she was sure he could hear it. His hands were still on her shoulders, thumb pressing lightly at the base of her neck in a way that made her whole skin tingle. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" August opened his mouth to answer, closed it again, visibly fighting with words, or perhaps feeling he didn't know how to name. Finally he said, with a raspy voice, "Because for the first time in 3 years I have a reason to wake up in the morning that isn't just obligation. Because when you smile, this whole house feels different. Because—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Because I care. And it's been so long since I cared about anything that now that I feel this again, I won't let anyone take it from me." The world seemed to reduce to that space between them, to those golden brown eyes looking at her with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. Alice knew she should pull away, knew this was dangerous, knew allowing herself to feel what she was feeling was asking to have her heart shattered. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she raised her hand and touched his face, fingers tracing the line of his jaw covered by rough stubble, feeling the muscles contracting under her touch. "August," she began, but didn't finish. because he took a step forward, eliminating the distance between them, and lowered his head until their foreheads touched, breaths mingling, so close she could see small flecks of green in his brown eyes. Hattie cleared her throat loudly for the second time in 2 weeks, and the two pulled apart as if shocked, turning to opposite sides, trying to recover composure. "Well," the old woman said with a tone that clearly hid a smile, "I see you two have things to sort out, but before you solve that, you need to deal with practical problems. Vance is going to keep stirring. The Colonel is going to keep looking. You need a plan." "What kind of plan?" August asked, still not looking at Alice. "The kind that makes Alice's presence here legitimate," Hattie replied. "The kind that makes Vance shut his mouth and makes the Colonel lose legal grounds to complain." "And what kind would that be?" Alice asked, though she already knew the answer, already felt where this led. "Marriage," Hattie said simply. "You get married, Alice stops being a single girl living improperly with a single man and becomes a wife living with her husband." Her engagement to the Colonel was arranged by family, didn't have legal documents yet. Once married to another, he has no more right over her. The silence that followed was dense and complicated. Alice looked at August, who was staring at the window, broad back, tense, hands closed in fists by his sides. "I won't trap you in a forced marriage to save you from another forced marriage," he said with a low voice. "Won't be another person taking away your choices." And if it's not forced," Alice heard herself saying before she could censor herself, "and if I choose this?" August turned so fast she took a step back. "What?" "You said it was my choice," Alice continued, heart thundering but voice steady. "Then I choose to stay. I choose to marry you if that means safety and a home. I choose you." The last words came out in a whisper, but were heard clearly. August looked at her as if she had proposed something completely incomprehensible, as if he didn't know whether to thank her or protest. "Alice," he said carefully, "you're talking about a real marriage, sharing a house, sharing a life, sharing everything. And I am a widowed man with demons I haven't exorcised yet. Don't know if I can be what you need." "You already are," she replied. "You already gave me more than anyone else. Gave me a choice, gave me a voice, treated me like a person instead of property. If you accept having me, I promise I'll make this house a home again. I'll bring life back, and maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe we can heal together." There was a promise in those words. There was hope. There was a possibility of something deeper than just an arrangement of convenience. August looked at her for a long, intense moment, internal war clear in every line of his face, then finally nodded slowly. "Then we'll get married," he said, "but we'll do it right. I'll talk to Pastor Justin tomorrow, arrange everything that needs arranging. And Alice," his eyes held hers, "I promise I will respect you. I will protect you. I will give you everything in my power to give." "I know," she whispered. "I trust you." And when Hattie left 1/2 hour later, Alice and August were left alone in the living room with a new silence between them, not uncomfortable, but loaded with possibilities and promises and unspoken fears. But the peace lasted less than a week. Vance Packard appeared on the property on a Tuesday morning, 6 days after the conversation with Hattie. Alice was in the garden picking lettuce when she heard the sound of horses approaching on the dusty road. She stood up slowly, wiping dirt-stained hands on her raw cotton apron, and felt her stomach sink, seeing 2 men riding toward the main house with a determination that promised nothing good. The man in front was portly, face ruddy like someone who drank too much and ate worse, grey moustache trimmed with excessive care that contrasted with the evident crudeness in every movement. The clothes were expensive, imported fabrics and impeccable cut, but couldn't give real elegance to someone who had none inside. The other rider was younger, maybe 30 years old, thin as a dry stick, small, cruel eyes of someone who liked causing pain, hand resting with suspicious familiarity on the handle of a large knife strapped to his leather belt. August came out of the house before the riders reached the central yard, as if he had sensed the approach of trouble. He positioned himself strategically, so his broad body stood between the visitors and Alice, blocking their direct line of sight to her. She noticed the subtle shift in his posture, shoulders getting broader, chin lifting, hands that were relaxed now, ready by his sides. It was a man who had fought before when necessary, a man who knew how to defend himself and defend what was his. "Vance," August said without any cordial greeting, voice neutral but with a coldness that made the air feel icier. "What brings you to my property?" Vance dismounted with less grace than he probably intended to show, prominent belly hindering the movement, boots hitting heavily on the packed dirt. The other man remained mounted, watching everything with the attention of a predator, studying possible prey, calculating distances and vulnerabilities. "Neighborliness, August," Vance said, with an oily smile that didn't come close to his small, calculating eyes. "Just paying a courtesy visit. Been a while since we talked properly, don't you think? Must be some 3 years since the last time we exchanged civilized words." "We have nothing to talk about," August replied, with a firmness that left no room for interpretation. "I already told you years ago, right after I buried my family, that I'm not selling my land. Repeated it when you came back 6 months later, and again when you insisted a year ago. My answer hasn't changed, ain't gonna change ever." "Ah, but things have changed," Vance retorted, and his gaze slid deliberately in Alice's direction before returning to August with barely disguised malice. "Changed quite a bit from what I see. Heard very interesting rumors in town the last few weeks. Rumors about you having company now. Female company, young and pretty. That's a considerable novelty, don't you think? Considering you've lived like a bitter hermit since the fever took Miss Eleanor and the boy." "What happens inside my property isn't a subject that concerns you," August said, and his voice dropped to a dangerous tone that made even the mounted henchman pay closer attention. "I suggest you mount your horse and go mind your own business." "But it is my business," Vance insisted, taking a step forward that reduced the distance between them in a calculatedly aggressive way. "You see, August, I'm a respectable man in this region. Decent landowner, generous contributor to the church, a person who cares deeply about the morals and good customs of our community. And when a widower suddenly has a young, single girl living under his roof without appropriate ties of matrimony or blood kinship, that raises serious questions. Questions of propriety, of decency, of the example set for others." The veiled threat was clear as crystal water. Alice felt hot anger rising up her throat, replacing the initial fear she had felt. She took 3 steps forward, completely ignoring the look of warning. August shot quickly in her direction, approaching close enough to be heard clearly. "Then it's great luck that all those moral questions won't be relevant for much longer," she said, lifting her chin and looking Vance directly in the eyes with a courage that surprised even herself. "August and I are getting married at the end of this week. Pastor Justin is already preparing all the necessary paperwork. The banns have been posted as church law requires. So any worry of yours about morality and decency can be saved for worrying about other matters that actually need your attention." Vance turned his gaze to her directly for the first time, and the way he examined her from head to toe made her skin crawl with visceral repulsion. It was a look that stripped, reduced, transformed a person into an object. "Marriage," he repeated, dragging the word out with evident disdain. "How convenient and timely. And who exactly are you, girl? Where did you spring from so suddenly? Why does absolutely no one in town know your family or where you came from?" Alice opened her mouth to answer, but August was faster, placing himself completely between the two now, totally blocking Vance's view of her. "Her identity, her past, her plans are also none of your business, Vance," August said, and there was pure steel in his voice now. "You came here, delivered your fake and poorly disguised concerns. Now I strongly suggest you get on that horse and get off my property, before I decide you're trespassing and take appropriate measures." Vance went dark red, veins popping in his thick neck, hands closing into fists by his sides, the mask of civility cracking rapidly to reveal true anger underneath. "You're going to regret this deeply, Mercer," he growled, taking a half-step forward before controlling himself. "You're going to regret not accepting my more than generous offer for the land when you had the chance, because now I'm going to make sure personally that everyone in this region, in every town, on every farm, knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Harboring runaways without asking questions, arranging hurried and suspicious marriages to hide immoral and questionable behavior." "Careful!" August interrupted, taking a step forward that made Vance recoil instinctively. "Be very careful with the words you choose to use, because some words can't be taken back once said. Some words have permanent consequences." The two men stared at each other in tense and dangerous silence, neither willing to back down first, the air between them practically crackling with the possibility of imminent physical violence. The rider who had come with Vance moved his hand closer to the knife on his belt, fingers closing lightly on the handle. August planted his feet more firmly on the ground, muscles in his shoulders visibly tensing even through the cotton shirt. Alice held her breath completely, heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears, feeling that a single wrong move from anyone would make the whole situation explode into bloody violence. It was Thomas who broke the growing impasse. The old caretaker came out of the large barn, walking with deliberate purpose, carrying an old but extremely functional and well-maintained hunting shotgun, not pointing it at anyone specifically, but holding it in a way that left no doubt he knew how to use it and would if necessary. "Boss," Thomas said with a calm but firm voice, "saw we have visitors here. Need any help escorting these gentlemen to the exit of the property?" Vance looked quickly between August standing firm in front of him, Thomas with the shotgun positioned casually but threateningly, and calculated the odds of forcing a confrontation right there. Apparently he didn't like what the math showed. He mounted his horse with jerky, angry movements, pulling the reins with unnecessary force that made the animal step back scared and snort in protest. "This is far, very far from over, Mercer," he promised, with a voice loaded with genuine hatred. "Not even close to finished. There are people out there, people with much more power and influence than me, who will want to know everything about your mysterious little bride. People who ask hard questions and don't accept half answers. You can be absolutely sure of that." He rode off the property, kicking up a cloud of red dust, the henchman following right behind, casting a final threatening look before disappearing down the road. The unspoken threats hung in the hot morning air like toxic smoke. August remained completely motionless until the two riders disappeared totally from view, until even the sound of hooves beating on the dusty road faded completely into the distance. Then he turned slowly to Alice, expression somber and worried. "He's going straight to talk to Colonel Sampson," August said, not as a possibility but as absolute certainty. "Probably already knows the full story of your escape, the arranged marriage, everything. Was just testing today, confirming information he already had, looking for extra ammunition to use." Alice nodded, feeling her mouth go dry, hands trembling slightly. "How much time do you think we have before he comes?" "Don't know for sure," August admitted, running a hand over his face in a gesture of fatigue and worry. "Days, maybe. A week at most, if we're lucky. Colonel Sampson has an ego and pride too big to simply let this pass without reacting. You ran from him publicly, embarrassed him before the whole community. A man like him doesn't forgive that easily. He's going to come get you personally, and when he comes, he won't come alone or unprepared. Then we need to get married as fast as possible. Alice said, with growing urgency in her voice. Tomorrow, if the pastor agrees. Today even, if there's any way to do it legally. August looked at her for a long, intense moment, brown eyes searching her green ones as if wanting to be absolutely sure before proceeding. Alice, he said slowly, are you absolutely certain about this? Real certain? Because marrying in a hurry out of necessity, out of fear, is different than marrying because you really want to. I won't trap you in a marriage you don't desire with your heart just to protect you from another forced marriage. Won't be another person stealing your choices and your voice. I am certain, Alice replied without any hesitation, holding his intense gaze. More certain than I've ever been about any decision in my entire life. I'm not choosing you just for protection or safety, August. I'm choosing you because, she hesitated only a second, finding courage. Because I already care about you more than I imagined possible in such a short time. Because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I want is to see you. Because this house feels like a real home when you're in it. Because you make me feel safe, yes, but also make me feel alive and seen and valued. So yes, I am absolutely certain. Something changed deeply in his face upon hearing those words. The tension in his shoulders relaxed minimally. Eyes became softer, mouth curved slightly in a near smile that had layers of emotion. Then I'm going to ride to town right now, he said with renewed determination. Going to talk personally with Pastor Justin, going to press to get this done as fast as humanly possible, keeping everything completely legal and documented properly. Going to do whatever is necessary so that when the Colonel finally gets here, you are already my wife in the eyes of the law, the church, and God. There was something in the specific way he said my wife that made warmth spread through Alice's entire chest. A hot and comforting sensation, and also slightly frightening in its intensity. It was possessiveness, yes, but the kind that protected without suffocating, that claimed without trapping. August rode out to Willow Creek less than an hour later, leaving Alice with old Tom and instructions that were extremely strict and specific. Do not leave the property for any reason. Keep all doors locked, even during the day. Do not open up for absolutely anyone you do not know personally. If a stranger appears, go straight to Tom and the shotgun. Alice agreed to everything, but she spent the rest of the day incredibly restless, unable to focus on any task for more than a few minutes. She tried to sew and pricked her finger 3 times in 15 minutes. She tried to read, but the words danced on the page without making sense. She tried to cook, but scorched the stew while watching the window instead of the pot. Finally, she gave up on productivity and just paced from one room to another, nervous and anxious, glancing out the window every few minutes, expecting to see horses approaching. It was during these long, lonely hours of agonizing waiting that she ended up exploring the house more fully, and inevitably she ended up in front of the bedroom door in the second-floor hallway. The room August kept closed. The room that had been his and Eleanor's, the room where they had slept together, loved together, dreamed together before everything was ripped away from them by the damn fever. Alice placed her hand on the cold brass doorknob, but hesitated. She knew instinctively she shouldn't enter, that this space was sacred territory in his accumulated grief, that violating that private sanctuary would be a grave betrayal of the trust August had so generously placed in her. But a curious and insecure part of her desperately needed to understand, needed to see with her own eyes, needed to know, even minimally, the woman who had completely possessed his heart before she arrived. She turned the knob expecting resistance, but was surprised when it yielded easily. It wasn't locked after all. Maybe it never had been. Maybe the lock was merely emotional and not physical. She pushed the heavy door open very slowly, old wood creaking loudly on hinges that clearly hadn't been used for years. The room was preserved exactly as it must have been left on the very day of the triple funeral. A large bed, perfectly made with a hand-stitched quilt in delicate floral patterns, a washstand with a white porcelain pitcher and bowl decorated with blue flowers, an antique vanity with a mirror slightly spotted by time and tortoiseshell combs still scattered across the surface, as if Eleanor might return at any moment to use them on her hair. Clothes still hung in the large wardrobe left open, women's dresses in soft pastel shades, a lace shawl hanging carefully on the metal hook behind the door, and photographs, many photographs. A large one on the wall above the headboard, a smaller one on the nightstand inside an ornate frame, a third on the vanity beside the combs. They all showed the same absolutely beautiful woman with wavy blonde hair and a radiant smile that lit up the entire picture, even in faded black and white. Sometimes alone, looking serenely at the camera, sometimes with August smiling in an open, genuine way Alice had never seen on him, sometimes with a beautiful little boy with messy dark curls and huge eyes that could only belong to Gabriel. Alice felt a sharp, painful pang of jealousy and immediately felt deep shame for it. How could she be jealous of a dead woman, a woman who had had a full life with August, who had given him a precious son, who had built a loving home that Alice was now desperately trying to rebuild upon ashes and memories? But the jealousy burned there anyway, mixed confusedly with genuine sorrow for everything he had lost so unfairly, and a growing fear that she would never, ever be enough to fill the void Eleanor had left. "You can go all the way in if you want," August's deep voice said suddenly behind her, making her jump in fright and spin around quickly. "It hasn't been locked for several months now. I unlocked it a while ago. I just can't really bring myself to go in and stay there yet." Alice turned completely and saw him standing in the doorway, leather hat in hand, hair messed by the wind from the ride, an expression impossible to fully interpret, layered with conflicting emotions. "I'm sorry," Alice said quickly, feeling guilt burn. "I shouldn't have intruded, shouldn't have touched this. I just—" "No," August interrupted firmly, stepping into the room for the first time in 3 whole years, and she saw every step costing him immense visible effort. "Don't apologize. You have every right to know who she was, what kind of place this was, what memories live in these walls." He looked slowly around with eyes that clearly saw happy ghosts dancing in the corners. "Eleanor was good. She was incredibly kind, infinitely patient with my faults, made this whole house shine and pulse with life just by being in it. Gabriel was exactly like her, pure, happy, saw magic in absolutely everything. They didn't deserve to die so young, with so much future still ahead." "I am so sorry," Alice whispered, her throat tight. "I am immensely sorry for your terrible loss, and I'm sorry that I can never be her, that I can never replace what you two had." August looked at her then, really looked deep and intense, and walked slowly until he was just a short step away. "Alice, I don't want or need you to be her," he said, with an intensity that stole the air completely from her lungs. "Eleanor was the love of my naive youth, was the devoted mother of my adored son, was a fundamental and important part of my life, and will always be respected and remembered. But she's gone. It's been 3 years since she left. And staying eternally trapped in the past, refusing to live again, would be deeply dishonoring her memory, because she would have hated seeing me like this, would have hated seeing this house dead and empty, would have hated seeing me merely existing instead of living." He raised his hand slowly and touched Alice's face with almost reverent delicacy, calloused fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "You are not a cheap substitute. You are completely different. You are yourself, Alice. Unique. And I—" He stopped, clearly struggling with difficult words, then apparently gave up on words completely and did what both secretly and desperately wanted for weeks. He lowered his head slowly and kissed her. The kiss began soft, almost hesitant, his lips testing hers with extreme care, as if she were fine porcelain that might break at the slightest rough touch. But Alice wasn't fragile. Not anymore. Not after everything she had survived and overcome. She pressed herself firmly against him, hands rising up his broad, solid chest until they bunched in his cotton shirt, pulling him even closer, eliminating any space. And the kiss changed nature completely. It became deeper, more urgent, more desperate. 3 whole years of his crushing loneliness meeting weeks of her constant growing desire. August's large hands settled on her waist, fingers closing firm but gentle, pulling her completely against his solid body, and Alice felt every inch of his heat through the multiple layers of clothes separating them, felt his heart beating strong and fast against hers, felt the tremor in his muscles, revealing he was as deeply and completely affected as she was. When they finally separated, both gasping for air, foreheads touching, breaths mingling, Alice saw in his hazel-green eyes an exact and perfect reflection of what she felt herself. Physical desire, yes, strong and undeniable, but also deep tenderness. Also fragile hope being reborn. Also something dangerously similar to true love. "I spoke at length with Pastor Justin," August said, his voice raspy with emotion. "Explained the situation, not all the specific details, but enough. He's a good man. Compassionate. He'll perform the ceremony the day after tomorrow, Thursday. It is absolutely the fastest I could arrange while keeping everything completely legal, properly documented, and minimally respecting church procedures." 2 days, Alice repeated, letting the reality sink in. Only 2 days and she would be his wife for real, legally, in the eyes of everyone. 2 days, August confirmed, and his hand moved up to smooth her loose hair in a gesture that was pure, uncomplicated affection. "Alice, last chance to be absolutely sure. Are you completely certain this is what you want? Because once officially married, once those vows are spoken—" "I'm sure," she interrupted without any hesitation, "more sure than I've been about absolutely anything in my entire life." And they kissed again right there in the room that had witnessed and guarded August's past love, but that now witnessed and blessed the birth of something completely new, something different, but no less significant, something that promised a real future, where before there was only a painful past and an empty present. Colonel Ignatius Ike Sampson arrived exactly the next day, Wednesday, just 1 day before the carefully planned wedding. Alice was helping old Tom hang clean laundry on the line when she heard the unmistakable thunder of multiple horses approaching rapidly down the road. She turned, feeling her stomach plummet, and saw 6 riders entering the property in a deliberately intimidating formation. The man riding in front was precisely as Alice remembered in the worst nightmares that woke her up sweating in the middle of the night. Tall, heavy-set but not fat, a hard face carved in naturally cruel lines, dark eyes completely cold like river stones in the harshest winter. He wore obviously expensive clothes, fine-tooled leather boots, a wide-brimmed hat, and carried a braided leather bullwhip hanging ostentatiously from his saddle, in a way that made it crystal clear he knew how to use it, and used it often. Behind him rode 5 men. Clearly professional hired guns brought specifically when serious trouble was expected and planned. All visibly armed with large Bowie knives and revolvers strapped in leather holsters. The exact kind of dangerous folk one hired for dirty work. And dirty work was exactly what the colonel had come to do. "Tom," Alice said, keeping her voice steady through the icy terror spreading through her entire body. "Go get August immediately. Fast." The old caretaker didn't waste precious time with unnecessary questions. He dropped the wet sheet he was holding and practically ran toward the barn where August was mending broken tools. Alice turned slowly to face the threatening group of men who had already dismounted and were approaching her with clear and dangerous determination. "Alice," the colonel said, and her own name coming out of that cruel mouth made her entire skin crawl with visceral disgust. "You caused immense trouble, you foolish girl, so much unnecessary trouble that could have been completely avoided with simple obedience." "I'm not going back," Alice said, forcing herself to lift her chin defiantly, even with her legs visibly trembling. "I won't marry you. Never. I'd rather die." The Colonel laughed, a sound completely devoid of real humor that was more pure threat than amusement. "Dying can certainly be arranged easily if you stubbornly insist on continuing to be difficult and disobedient. But it really doesn't need to reach unnecessary extremes. You simply come back with me now, behaved and silent, finally accept the advantageous marriage your sensible mother arranged, and I generously forget this ridiculous escape and forgive you for the public shame you caused me. I might even be generous enough not to punish you too severely." Punish. The word confirmed absolutely everything Alice had always known instinctively about this monstrous man. He viewed wives as property to be disciplined harshly, controlled totally, broken violently if necessary. "I said clearly that I am not going," Alice repeated with more firmness. "I am going to marry another man, August Mercer, tomorrow. Pastor Justin has already prepared absolutely everything that is necessary." The Colonel's face turned dark red, thick veins popping dangerously in his neck. "You aren't marrying anyone," he growled low, taking a threatening step forward that made Alice recoil purely by instinct. "You belong to me. I paid your family's debts generously, paid your mother for you, bought you legally and properly. You are my property." "I belong to absolutely no one," Alice shouted, and finally the accumulated anger completely overcame the paralyzing fear. "I am not cattle to be bought and sold at market. I am not an object without a will. I am a human person. I have rights. I have my own choices." "A woman has no choices," the Colonel said with a dangerously icy voice. "A woman has an owner who decides for her, and you are completely mine until I personally decide otherwise." It was precisely then that August appeared. He came out of the barn, walking with determined and dangerous purpose, a hunting shotgun firmly in hand, old Tom right behind him, also properly armed. The Colonel's 5 henchmen immediately moved hands to their own heavy weapons, tension exploding instantly into a serious potential for imminent and bloody violence. "She is going absolutely nowhere with you," August said, stopping strategically between Alice and the Colonel, forming a solid and insurmountable barrier of muscle and iron determination. "Alice is my honored guest. Tomorrow she will officially be my wife, and you are trespassing on my property without any permission or invitation." The Colonel assessed August carefully with a gaze that coldly calculated odds, weighed relative strengths, measured risks. "You're August Mercer," he said slowly. "I know you and your sad story. Pathetic widower, half crazy from endless mourning, living here isolated like a hermit for whole years avoiding humanity. And now suddenly you want to marry my runaway fiancée?" He spat crudely on the ground. "Don't make me laugh at the ridiculous situation." "She was never your fiancée for real," August retorted dangerously. "She was sold completely against her explicit will. That isn't a legitimate engagement. It's pure human trafficking, and it absolutely isn't going to happen while I'm breathing." The Colonel smiled then, the smile of a venomous snake spotting perfectly cornered prey. "That can be very easily arranged," he said coldly, making a clear signal to the armed henchmen. "Grab the girl immediately. Kill without hesitation anyone who dares interfere." The 5 dangerous men advanced simultaneously, hands going quickly to deadly weapons, but August instantly raised the shotgun, aiming directly at the Colonel's chest. "Take one single step more and I shoot without hesitating," he warned with a deadly voice. "I might not get all of you before I fall, but I guarantee absolutely that I'm taking your boss with me first." The Colonel made an abrupt signal for the men to freeze. No one was paid well enough to deliberately take a bullet for the boss. The tense standoff established itself dangerously, everyone paralyzed in clear positions of imminent attack, a single wrong move from anyone away from an inevitable bloodbath. That was when a solitary horse appeared rapidly on the road, a lone rider galloping at a speed that kicked up a dramatic cloud of red dust. Alice recognized immediately Pastor Justin, the brave young clergyman who had arrived in town only 6 months ago, known for passionate sermons on Christian compassion and social justice. "What exactly is happening here?" the pastor asked firmly, dismounting quickly and positioning himself strategically where he could be clearly seen by absolutely everyone involved. "I heard urgent rumors in town that there was a serious and potentially violent confrontation at Clearwater Farm, and came as absolutely fast as possible." "This isn't church business, Pastor," the colonel said with evident disdain. "It is a strictly private matter. There is absolutely nothing private about threatening brutal violence against a young woman who clearly does not want to marry you, Colonel." The pastor replied with genuinely impressive courage for someone completely unarmed, surrounded by extremely dangerous men. "And as an official representative of the church that you apparently intend to use to falsely legitimize this completely forced union, it becomes very deeply my business. The girl is mine by legal right," the colonel insisted. "Her family accepted the generous dowry properly." "A dowry that was never ever documented legally on paper," Pastor Justin countered calmly. "I took the liberty of extensively verifying all official records in town. There is no legally signed contract, no marriage bans published previously, absolutely nothing that links Alice Martin legally to you other than a merely verbal agreement that she, being a woman of age, has the complete legal right to refuse." The colonel turned purple with impotent rage. "You've been a preacher for 5 miserable minutes, you impertinent boy. Don't come giving me pompous lessons on law." "But I can give those lessons," another firm female voice said clearly. Miss Hattie appeared walking determinedly down the road, accompanied by a significant group of 12 townspeople, men and women, some vaguely known to Alice from the very brief moments August took her there, all with extremely determined expressions. "And all these honest witnesses present here can confirm publicly and under oath that you have a long and well-documented history of brutal violence against defenseless women, Colonel. Your first wife didn't really die of pneumonia, as you officially claimed. She died of serious head injuries after falling down a suspicious staircase that absolutely no sensible person believes was an accident. 3 different maids fled, terrified, from your plantation, with extensive bruises they personally showed me, and at least 4 different families sought me out over the years, asking for desperate help for daughters you were pressuring and threatening." The grave accusations dropped like explosive bombs in the tense silence. The colonel looked quickly at the growing group of brave witnesses, at the determined pastor who wouldn't back down, at August, who still kept the shotgun firmly aimed at him, at Alice, who stared back at him finally with no more fear in her eyes. He had lost, and he knew it. He could force violence here and now immediately, but with so many respectable witnesses, with an official representative of the church present, the legal and social consequences would be more severe than even he, with all his power, could easily escape, especially if Hattie's serious accusations began to be formally investigated by the authorities. "This isn't over," the colonel said finally, but the threat sounded surprisingly hollow. "You will regret this deeply, foolish girl. All of you will bitterly regret going against me." He mounted his horse with jerky, angry movements, signaling abruptly for the henchmen to follow. They rode quickly off the property in a dense cloud of dust and completely impotent hatred, leaving behind a silence that slowly, gradually transformed into palpable collective relief. Alice felt her legs weaken dangerously, and would certainly have fallen if August hadn't dropped the shotgun exactly in time to catch her firmly. He pulled her protectively against his broad chest, arms wrapping around her with a strength that was absolute safety and protection, and she buried her face in his solid shoulder, trembling uncontrollably with intense relief and delayed reaction to the terror. "It's completely over," August murmured repeatedly against her hair. "It's over. He will never touch you. No one will." The supportive group from town approached slowly, respectfully, Hattie in front, with a genuinely satisfied smile. "Thought you folks definitely might need support and witnesses," the healer woman said warmly. "So I brought some willing friends." "Thank you," August said, his voice choked with deep emotion. "Thank you to absolutely all of you. I don't know how to thank you adequately." "You can thank us simply by showing up tomorrow for the wedding," Pastor Justin said, with a genuinely kind smile. "And you can thank us by finally coming back to be an active part of the community, August. You've isolated yourself for too long. It is time finally to return to the land of the living." August looked at Alice, still held in his arms, then at the good people who had bravely come to defend someone they barely knew simply because it was the morally right thing to do. For the first time in 3 whole years, he didn't feel the absolutely crushing weight of loneliness and guilt. He felt something completely different, lighter, warmer, more hopeful. He felt the real possibility of a future. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances and true love. The wedding happened exactly as planned the following afternoon, Thursday, in the small private chapel of Clearwater Farm that hadn't been used for absolutely anything since the devastating triple funeral of Eleanor and Gabriel. August and old Tom had spent the entire morning working hard, meticulously cleaning, sweeping layers of dust, prying open stuck windows, letting golden light and fresh air finally enter again. Miss Hattie had generously brought beautiful flowers from her own tended garden, pure white lilies and vibrant yellow roses that filled the entire space with natural perfume and vivid color. Alice wore a simple but beautiful white cotton dress that Hattie and 2 friends had sewn in a rush working the whole night, loose brown hair falling in soft natural waves over her shoulders, a simple crown of small white flowers woven with delicacy. There was no traditional veil, no ostentatious luxury, nothing of what a formal wedding theoretically should have. But when she walked slowly into the chapel and saw August waiting patiently at the altar, wearing the best suit he owned, hair combed carefully, beard trimmed with care, looking at her as if she were absolutely the most beautiful thing he had seen in his entire life, Alice felt genuinely like the most beautiful bride in the world. The ceremony was relatively brief, but deeply touching. Pastor Justin spoke eloquently about precious second chances, about true love born of genuine compassion and forged in difficulties overcome together, about how real family is as much about conscious choice as it is about shared blood. The townspeople who had generously come to witness watched with visibly misty eyes, clearly touched by the honest simplicity and palpable sincerity of the moment. When it finally came time for personal vows, August held Alice's delicate hands between his large calloused ones and spoke with a surprisingly steady voice. "I solemnly promise to honor you, respect you deeply, protect you fiercely for the rest of my entire life. I promise to make this house a true home again. I promise you will never feel lost or alone again. And I promise I will love you with everything I have in me, every day, until my last breath." Alice felt hot tears flowing freely down her face, tears of pure and intense happiness. "I promise to bring life back to this house and to your heart," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "I promise to be by your side in good days and bad days. I promise to honor with respect the memory of those you lost while we build a new future together. And I promise to love you not just because I need protection, but because I choose you. Every day of my life, I choose you." When Pastor Justin finally declared them husband and wife, and said with a warm smile that August could kiss the bride. The kiss was soft and sweet and deeply intimate, even while witnessed by dozens of smiles and emotional applause. And in that sacred moment, in the chapel that had seen so much unbearable pain, something completely new and precious was born. Hope reborn, true love, a blessed new beginning. The party was simple but genuinely joyful, held on the spacious porch of the main house with abundant food that everyone had contributed generously. There was savory roast pork, creamy potato salad, golden cornbread still warm, a large peach cobbler, fragrant strong coffee, and smooth homemade corn whiskey. People ate with pleasure, drank happily, laughed loudly, told funny and touching stories. August smiled and laughed more that golden afternoon than he had smiled in the entire 3 dark previous years combined. When the sun finally began to set, dyeing the sky intense orange and pink, and the satisfied guests began to leave one by one, leaving sincere blessings and warm wishes for eternal happiness, Alice and August were finally completely alone. Old Tom had discreetly gone to his simple shack at the back of the property, leaving the entire main house to the newlywed couple. Alice was in the warm kitchen, carefully putting away the last clean dishes, when she felt strong arms wrapping around her waist from behind. August pulled her gently against his solid body, chin resting comfortably on top of her head. "Hello, wife," he murmured against her loose hair, and she felt the genuine smile vibrating in the words. "Hello, husband," Alice replied, turning gracefully in his arms to face him directly. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm finally waking up from a very long and heavy dream," August said slowly, golden eyes shining. "Like for the first time in whole years, I can breathe completely right." He caressed her face with touching reverence. "You did this. You brought life back when I was sure it had died with them. We did this," Alice corrected gently. "Together. Always together." And they kissed right there in the warm kitchen, perfumed with the residual smell of coffee and cake, kissed with rapidly growing urgency and desire, hands exploring bravely, breaths quickening audibly. When they finally separated, both panting and flushed, August lifted her easily in his arms, making her give a surprised and delighted little yelp. "There's an old tradition about carrying the bride over the threshold," he said, with a mischievous and boyish smile she had never seen before, and which made her love him even more intensely. "I reckon I should honor absolutely all proper traditions." He carried her carefully up the stairs to the master bedroom, the room that had been his and Eleanor's, but would now be theirs, his and Alice's forever. The room was completely transformed. Old Tom and Miss Hattie had worked silently there during the ceremony, changing all the sheets for crisp new white ones, placing fresh, fragrant flowers in vases, opening wide windows. Eleanor's precious photographs had been carefully and respectfully moved to the parlor, not hidden, but also no longer dominating the intimate space. It was a perfect balance of deep respect for the past, while generously allowing for the future. August deposited Alice beside the large bed with extreme care, then stopped, looking suddenly uncertain and vulnerable. "I haven't done this in a long time," he admitted with raw vulnerability that touched her heart deeply. "And I desperately want it to be good for you. I want to do absolutely everything right." Alice placed her soft hands on his bearded face, gently forcing him to look directly at her. "You already do everything right," she said with absolute conviction. "You respect me, truly hear me, treat me as an equal. The rest we figure out together, without rushing." And they figured it out. Undressing was a slow and deeply intimate process, layers of clothes gradually revealing layers of vulnerability and built trust. August touched Alice as if she were infinitely precious, large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle, tracing curves and discovering sensitive spots that made her gasp and tremble. Alice explored his muscular body with genuine curiosity and constantly growing desire, discovering old scars that told stories of a fully lived life, solid muscles built by decades of honest work. When they finally joined completely, it was with reverent tenderness first, then with growing and overwhelming passion, finally with total and liberating abandon. 3 whole years of his crushing loneliness, meeting weeks of her carefully repressed desire in a beautiful explosion of need, intense pleasure, and profound connection. It wasn't technically perfect. It was infinitely better than perfect because it was absolutely real. It was completely shared vulnerability. It was warm laughter when something didn't work exactly right. It was patient adjustments and delicious discoveries and eventually sweeping pleasure that left both trembling and breathless in each other's arms. Afterward, lying intimately intertwined with sheets completely messed up and sweat cooling pleasantly on heated skin, heart still racing, beginning gradually to slow down, Alice traced invisible patterns on August's broad chest while he absent-mindedly played with her long hair. "I love you," she whispered in the quiet and intimate darkness of the room. "I know it might be too soon. I know it might seem crazy, but it is the absolute truth. I love you." August went very still for a long moment, then turned her gently so they faced each other, eyes meeting eyes even in the soft silvery light of the full moon entering through the open window. "It isn't too soon," he said with a voice raspy with intense emotion. "It isn't crazy at all. It is the sanest and truest thing I have ever felt in my life." He kissed her forehead tenderly, then the tip of her nose, then her lips with infinite sweetness. "I love you, Alice. Love you for making me want to live fully again. Love you for being brave and strong and incredibly kind. Love you for consciously choosing to stay when you could have easily gone. I simply love you." And they fell asleep like that, completely intertwined, whole in a way neither had been for too long, with a real promise of tomorrows that finally were genuinely worth waiting for. The following months were of visible and deep transformation. Clearwater Farm literally came to life in a way that surprised absolutely everyone who visited. Alice planted extensive gardens that exploded in colorful flowers of all varieties, organized a productive vegetable patch that generated abundant greens, hung new cheerful curtains she sewed herself with care, filled every corner of the house with small feminine and personal touches that turned merely functional spaces into a genuinely welcoming home. But the real transformation went far beyond the merely physical. August laughed now, laughed frequently and genuinely, the sound coming deep from his chest. He began visiting town regularly again, patiently rebuilding social connections he had completely abandoned. He hired 3 additional hands to help on the growing farm, ambitiously expanding crops, buying more quality cattle. The property that was visibly withering began to prosper again impressively. Alice also changed deeply. The scared and desperate girl, who fainted exhausted on the road, transformed into a confident woman who knew perfectly her own worth. She established a small, profitable business selling artisanal breads and homemade sweets in town, products so exceptionally good she soon had a constant line of loyal customers. The money was exclusively hers to do absolutely whatever she wished, and August insisted firmly on that, insisted she maintain complete financial independence, that she never ever feel trapped or dependent. 6 months after the wedding, on a warm, golden afternoon in January, Alice was sitting quietly on the porch sewing when Miss Hattie arrived for a routine visit. The observant healer looked at her with those piercing black eyes, then smiled in a way that seemed to know deep secrets. "You're pregnant," Hattie declared without any preamble. Alice let the sewing drop forgotten, hand going instinctively to her belly, still completely flat. "How do you know?" "I only started suspecting myself a few days ago." Hattie laughed warmly. My dear child, I have done literally hundreds of deliveries in decades of work. I recognize the subtle signs before the woman herself is sure. The specific way you turned away from the cup of coffee this morning, as if the smell bothered you. The protective way you are sitting unconsciously guarding your belly. You are pregnant, yes. About 2 full months, I'd reckon. Alice felt tears filling her eyes quickly. A baby. She and August were going to have a baby. New life, genuine new beginning, precious new chance. Are you happy about it? Hattie asked, gently observing. I am completely terrified, Alice admitted honestly, and simultaneously totally happy. How do I tell August? After absolutely everything he went through, after losing Gabriel so tragically, how do I say I'm pregnant without bringing all those devastating memories back? Hattie took Alice's hand and squeezed affectionately. You tell him with complete honesty and love, and trust that he is strong enough now to handle it well. He isn't that completely broken man anymore, Alice. You helped deeply to heal him. Now you need to fully trust that healing. Alice told August that same night after a quiet dinner. She took him to the porch, where they had total privacy, sat beside him on the wooden swing bench he had built weeks ago, and held his large hands firmly in her small ones. I have something important to tell you, she began, heart thundering uncontrollably. Something very important. August turned immediately to her, instant worry on his face. Is everything okay? Are you sick? No, it's nothing like that, Alice said, quickly reassuring him. It's... She took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby. The silence that followed seemed to last an agonizing eternity. August sat completely still, eyes wide, processing the information. Alice watched his face with growing apprehension, desperately trying to decipher what he was feeling. Then she saw it clearly, saw the solitary tear run slowly down his face, followed by another, then more. Saw the smile start slow, grow gradually, transform his entire face. Saw pure joy mixed with understandable fear, mixed with renewed hope, mixed with totally overwhelming love. A baby, August repeated with a voice strangled by emotion. We're going to have a baby? Yes, we are, Alice confirmed, also crying now freely. Miss Hattie confirmed it today. I'm about 2 months along. August, I know it's scary after what happened to Gabriel. I know perfectly well it brings back painful memories, but... He interrupted her, pulling her into a hug so tight she could barely breathe properly. It is scary, yes, he admitted against her hair, but it is also absolutely wonderful. It is living proof that life goes on, that true love creates new and precious things, that real futures are possible even after devastating losses. He held her away enough to look deep into her eyes. I love you. I love our baby already. I love the life we are building together, and I solemnly swear I will do everything different this time, will protect you both with absolutely everything I have. Their daughter was born in September of 1897, on a clear, crisp morning, with a perfect blue sky without a single cloud. Miss Hattie performed the delivery with the expertise of decades, with August holding Alice's hand firmly the entire time, refusing absolutely to leave the room, even when the healer suggested diplomatically. Alice worked hard, sweated abundantly, screamed when necessary, and finally brought into the world a small and absolutely perfect girl with impressively strong lungs that announced her arrival with an indignant and healthy wail. When Hattie placed the baby wrapped in a clean blanket into Alice's exhausted arms, and August knelt reverently beside the bed looking at wife and daughter with complete and wonder-struck adoration, Alice felt a circle closing perfectly. Not that it replaced what was lost. No one would ever replace Gabriel or Eleanor, but they had created something genuinely new, something that respectfully honored the past while joyfully celebrating the future. They named the girl Helena, an ancient name meaning bright light, And she was exactly that. Precious light brought to a house that had seen so much suffocating darkness. 2 years flew by, and on a sunny day in November, Alice was in the blooming garden teaching Helena, now a beautiful toddler, with messy dark curls and bright green eyes, walking unsteadily exploring the world with infinite curiosity, to smell the colourful flowers delicately. August watched from the porch, with a permanent smile on his face, old Tom beside him, making an affectionate comment about how the girl was smart and curious, just like her mother. Clearwater Farm was genuinely prosperous now, recognized throughout the region for exceptionally high-quality produce and for the loving family that ran it. Alice had considerably expanded her baking business, now employing 3 girls from town to help with growing demand. August had diversified crops intelligently, was consulted regularly by other farmers, had completely rebuilt his reputation. But more important than evident material success, they had built a true home. A home abundantly full of genuine love, constant laughter, pulsing life. A home where the past was honored with respect but didn't imprison cruelly, where the future was built consciously with hope and hard work. That golden afternoon, when Helena finally slept for a necessary nap, Alice and August walked together to the small, well-tended family plot on the property where Eleanor and Gabriel rested eternally. They did this occasionally, bringing fresh flowers, sharing news, keeping the memory lovingly alive, but no longer dominant. "I think she would have liked you immensely," August said, looking at Eleanor's simple headstone. "Would have loved seeing you bringing life back, caring for me, caring for all this with such love." He looked at Alice and smiled genuinely, "and I think Gabriel and Helena would have been inseparable friends." "They absolutely would have," Alice agreed, placing fresh, fragrant flowers on the tended graves. "And one day we will tell Helena about the older brother she unfortunately never met, about her father's first family. We will ensure she knows the whole complete story." "The whole story," August repeated thoughtfully. "The terrible pain and loss, but also the healing and love. How the painful end of something can be the precious beginning of something else. How allowing yourself to feel and love again after tragedy isn't betrayal, but true honor to the memory of those we lost." They walked back to the house, holding hands comfortably, shadows lengthening in the golden afternoon, and Alice reflected deeply on everything that had happened since that rainy afternoon when she fainted desperate on the muddy road. She thought of the terrified young woman with absolutely nowhere to go, of the broken man who merely existed mechanically, and how both found mutual salvation in each other. Life wasn't perfect. There were still occasionally difficult days, still painful memories that visited without warning, still inevitable moments of fear and uncertainty. But there was also abundant love. There was also genuine joy. There was also solid hope that didn't exist before. And as they entered together into the house that was now truly a home in the deepest sense, hearing old Tom whistling happily in the kitchen, seeing Helena's childish drawings scattered lovingly on the table, feeling August's strong hand squeezing hers with tenderness, Alice knew with absolute certainty she had made the right choice. That desperate day, she said she had nowhere to go. Because she finally discovered that a true home isn't a specific place found on a map. A genuine home is where your heart finally finds lasting peace. Home is where someone chooses you consciously as much as you choose that person. Home is where love transforms pain into deep healing and despair into renewed hope. And she had found home exactly where she least expected. In the strong arms of a lonely man who was also completely lost, in the fertile fields of a farm that was dying, in the generous community that learned to make space for improbable but absolutely true love. Life would go on, seasons would change, crops would grow and be harvested. Helena would grow up healthy, perhaps would have siblings eventually. The farm would prosper or face challenges. But through absolutely everything, Alice and August would have each other. And that, they discovered with gratitude, was more than enough. Because true love isn't just about sunny days and perfectly planned moments. It is about consciously choosing to stay when it would be infinitely easier to walk away. It is about building together when everything is broken. It is about transforming the despair of "I have nowhere to go" into the deep peace of "I have finally arrived home." And on that quiet afternoon in November, as the sun set majestically, dyeing the entire sky intense orange and pink, while their beloved daughter slept safely, while the farm breathed life all around, Alice and August interlaced their fingers on the porch and watched the golden horizon together, grateful for every moment, every choice, every overcome pain that had brought them there, to that perfect moment, to that true home, to that love that had saved two lost souls and transformed them into a family.